Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of RPG Radio. My name is Winback, and on today's video we're taking a look at the final evolution of our Archon. This is a block chance and attack speed Archon built for maximum punchitude and maximum survivability. Since this is the final part of the video, this is going to be all about gear and how you're going to stay alive and get maximum points for your abilities in the endgame. Bear in mind, this isn't the maximum efficient use of this build, but it is enough to keep you alive with some of the tougher enemies in Ultimate and give you a jumping off point to find something that just goes even further so you can hunt down all those Nemesis bosses and see if you can take on some of the Celestials on your own. In order to make sure that we're keeping everybody engaged though, let's get started. There's a couple easy pieces of gear that are going to be really important for this build, and once you find them, your damage should spike up pretty considerably. Remember, once you make it into Ultimate, legendary pieces of gear will drop pretty frequently as long as you're farming them from shrines, from big enemies, and from very important parts in the game. Since this build takes a big focus with Shattering Smash, the first pieces of gear that we're going to talk about are going to have a lot of points into Shattering Smash so that we can take points that we've invested out earlier and put them into other points of our build. Diversifying those maxed out skill points means that we can buff up other parts of our build that are failing through some of those abilities because they haven't been able to keep up with Ultimate. But more importantly, Shattering Smash, since that is our main hand ability when it comes to this build, we have quite a few pieces of gear that are doing either 3 or more extra points in. The maximum capacity that you can get for Shattering Smash though is only 20 points. So once you hit 20, you're maxed out, and any points over that are going to be entirely wasted. That, however, brings us to the first piece of gear that is actually a 3-part set. The set that we're looking for is the Stone Guard, and you're going to need to be level 94 in order to use this, but the Stone Guard set starts with the Stone Guard Pummeler, your main hand, one-handed weapon. The Stone Guard Pummeler does physical damage itself, but buffs physical and internal trauma damage, which are our big 2 damage types in this build. It also gives you flat health and defensive ability with an astronomical amount of attack speed, which is another one of those stats that this build requires to fire off Shattering Smash more often. After you get the attack speed, you're looking at a big chunk of bleeding resistance and reduced stun duration, which are incredibly useful when it comes to getting CC'd in Ultimate. Reducing stun means that you can live longer, which is something that this build excels in. Finally, we're going to be increasing all of our retaliation damage by a pretty decent chunk as well, so this build can dish it out anytime that it gets hit. Now, as far as the points that this single item is going to give to Shattering Smash, you're going to get +3 just from equipping the item, but you're also getting 26% of your retaliation damage added to your attack as well for Shattering Smash. So, because this build specifically has a lot of retaliation damage going, the chunk of damage that Shattering Smash will be getting just from that 26% is massive. If we're looking at physical retaliation damage alone for this build, right now we've got it set at about 48,000 damage. So if you take 26% of that, you're looking at right around 12,500 damage added to your retaliation damage for your Shattering Smash. So that is a big chunk of damage. Coupled with some offhand math, you can work out the best for your own build, but this weapon is massively helpful for just that one ability and getting the most out of it. Now, after you've picked up the Pummeler, you can find either the Ward, which is the amulet, or the Girdle, which is the belt. The amulet specifically is going to do a lot of the same things that the Pummeler's doing, with buffs to physical and internal trauma damage, attack speed, pierce resistance, all that sort of fun stuff. The other parts that are cool about the amulet, however, is that it's going to increase your cunning by a percentage, which is incredibly helpful because this build definitely has some trouble in the offensive ability area. There isn't a whole lot of critting going on with this build because of that lack of offensive ability, but the amount of damage that it can do on its own just by hitting and surviving is still enough to make it at least usable for the vast majority of Ultimate. Now, apart from that, you're also getting chaos resistance, which is something that is more difficult to find the further that you go in this game, and 10 to 14% is a pretty decent chunk. You're also getting elemental resistance, which is super efficient on its own, so it's not something you ever want to ignore. But more importantly than the resistances themselves, the ward, the amulet, is giving you a maximum increase to both your pierce and chaos resistance. So you're getting 4% more on the final number of those resistances, bumping you up to 86% and 89% if you are followed along exactly for what I've got in the build in the video. That being said, even if you don't have it exactly, that's not a big deal either, but your maximum resistances for both of those stats are getting bumped, which is incredibly helpful because more resistance equals more survivability, which is more damage, which is more good. You're also getting some flat physical damage retaliation added on with the Stone Guard ward, and +3 to retribution. Retribution is, of course, one of our modifiers for Righteous Fervor, and that's going to be adding a whole bunch of damage to it, as well as adding some more of our retaliation damage added to attack to that ability as well. So Righteous Fervor is going to become a very potent stand there and punch ability while we're doing everything else. On top of that, you're getting another 5% of retaliation damage added to attack to Righteous Fervor, so everything that I just said makes it even more punchy, fulfilling all of our deepest, darkest desires to stand there and fight everything in existence. The Stone Guard ward also comes with its own ability, which has a 10% chance of activating, but when it does, it is a 3-second duration, 350 damage absorption shield that has an 8-second cooldown. Never underestimate the value of a good shield when it comes to this game, and definitely make the best use of that as you can. Obviously, it's not something that you control, you know what I'm saying, but it's great. So the more that you stand up front and punch people, the more that you can activate the shield, the more damage you can mitigate, and the happier you're going to be. Now, the final piece for the Stone Guard set is the Stone Guard Girdle, and that is your belt. Again, buffing physical and internal trauma damage, this time giving you a % increase to your physique, which means more health, more livability, as always, more defensive ability, while also giving you pierce resistance, poison and acid resistance, and a reduced stun duration yet again. So these pieces in this set are going to do wonders for keeping you away from all those components that you're going to need and devotions that you're going to need to increase the reduced stun duration stat. This set is perfect for making you tanky. You're also increasing your maximum acid and poison resistance cap by another 4% as well, which is always helpful. And we are going to get some more physical damage retaliation added to that enormous pool that I just mentioned a little while ago. On top of that, the build, while it doesn't have any special effect like the weapon or the amulet, it is going to give you +3 more to retribution and +3 more to shattering smash. So the belt itself is doing the points that you wanted both of the other things to do together, and just coming together like the glue that holds the pieces of the set all nice and cozy. Hopefully that made sense, but you get it. The belt is good. We're getting 6 points to both Retribution and Shattering Smash just for having this 3-piece set completed in and of itself. That is fantastic, because 3-piece sets are usually very efficient in terms of what they can do. Now, just for completing 2 pieces of this set, you're going to get a flat 180 armor and 120% buff to your physical damage retaliation. After you complete all 3, you're going to increase all of your armor by 15%, you're going to increase the amount of damage it absorbs by 25%, and you're going to get it +1 to everything in your Oathkeeper side of the build. After that, you're going to get a Stone Guard ability, specifically called Stone Guard, that has a 25% chance when you are hit by melee attacks to activate. It's got a 10-second cooldown but a 6-second duration, and is going to increase your armor by 100%, meaning that you will have double armor for 6 seconds, and and you're going to get 1400 more physical damage retaliation while buffing that up by another 80%. So basically, you get extra tanky when they go to punch you, and you're going to punch them right back exquisitely hard. The whole reason I even brought this setup first is because it has so many good things for what this build is trying to do in terms of survivability, in terms of damage, in terms of ability buffs. Everything that the Stone Guard set is built around what our Archon is going for. So I highly recommend farming up those items before you get any others, because the damage is going to explode out the roof of your house, go to visit Mars, and bring you back some shiny red rocks from space while telling you all the cool alien stories it got along the way. Now, the next item that we're going to talk about is something that you can actually get much earlier than Ultimate. I didn't bring this up in the last video because it wasn't an item-focused video, but when you are looking for a good damage spike while going through Elite, you can get the Relic Honor very early on and start using it as soon as level 60. Honor you can make once you get the Relic from your blacksmith, and this is going to increase all of your damage by anywhere from 56 to 84%, give you a very big buff of 12% damage to human type enemies, while increasing your attack speed and block chance anywhere from 3 to 5%. Obviously, those are two stats we are all about, so Honor itself is an incredibly good relic. It's also giving you fire retaliation damage while buffing all of your retaliation damage and giving you a +1 to everything in Oathkeeper, meaning that you can redistribute those Shattering Smash points and any other maxed out ability points into other failing abilities much quicker. Honor also comes with a very cool activatable ability, and that is called Vire's Cascade. If you haven't noticed, this build does have a little bit of a Vire theme going on while using her devotion and picking up any item that has her name on it. But Vire's Cascade is one of the abilities that you've probably seen in the video to this point that fires out these big waves of very spiky rocks. And Vire's Cascade specifically is on a very short cooldown while launching a 5 projectile fan that goes through all of the enemies that it hits. It's got a fairly short range if we are comparing it to some other bigger damaging abilities in the game, but as far as for what we want it to do, since we're always going to be in the face of plenty of enemies, there will be no shortage of damage for Vire's Cascade to do. Now, it's going to do half of your weapon damage, and it's going to take 22% of your retaliation damage and add that to the pool that it does as well. It's also going to do its own flat physical, fire, and internal trauma damage, which ticks all of the boxes for our damage types in this build anyway, so Vire's Cascade sits nice and easy, giving us a very good ranged ability when we're just trying to get through a wave of enemies and on to the next objective. Don't forget that when you complete your relic, you do get what's called a completion bonus, and that will be one of a number of increases to random stats or abilities in this case, since we finished Honor. Honor gives you +1 to, in my case, Rebuke and Celestial Presence, but it could be anything from Tectonic Shift and Celestial Presence, Shattering Smash and Consecration, Smite and Shattering Smash. The list is not endless, but there are quite a few of them that I don't need to go into. So roll your Honor, get the abilities that it's going to give you, and be happy with what you got, or just roll it again, because you can build as many of those bad boys as you need to. On top of getting your relic early on, you could also get a pair of gloves pretty early on in this build that will do a decent amount of work for you. I'm holding on to the mythical Brawler's gloves right now as my epic punchy gloves, but you can get the regular version of the Brawler's gloves and the empowered version of the Brawler's gloves as early as your normal playthrough and your elite playthrough. When you pick these gloves up, you're going to be giving yourself +3 to Shattering Smash, which in and of itself makes the gloves infinitely more useful or valuable than a lot of other gloves that you can get in the game. Add to that they're giving you a flat amount of internal trauma damage while buffing the physical internal trauma and bleeding damage that you already do, and you've got a mixture of some very high damage gloves for what we're all about. You're also getting a huge chunk of offensive ability out of them with the mythical version, and bleeding resistance with reduced stun duration on top of that. If you haven't seen a theme with the reduced stun duration stats on all of this stuff, there you have it. It's literally tickling your nose, hoping that you sneeze in the best way that you possibly can. You're also getting a buff to all of your retaliation damage with +3 to Shattering Smash like I mentioned, and one bit of a wasted stat is going to be +3 to Upheaval. Since Upheaval is based on having a two-handed weapon, that goes completely out the window because we are a sword and board build in this house. It also gives you the ability to use Knockout, which is the glove ability, activates on a 12% chance and does 200% weapon damage along with its own flat internal trauma and bleeding damage. Couple that with the ability to knock a target down for 0.6 seconds and you've got a very potent skill activating any time that you attack. Well, a 12% chance anytime that you attack. You can also upgrade the gloves with the Unholy Inscription component because you do, sad to say, have a bit of a weakness when it comes to vitality resistance with this build. I did have to use quite a few augments and components to make sure that that thing hit the cap, so put on the Unholy Inscription, which will give you a 10% vitality res, 15 offensive ability, and 15% bleeding res. If you manage to find those gloves early on in this build, the next thing that you can start realistically easily farming for the build is going to be the metal. And the metal is your Wendigo Glare. This you can get in Act 5 from the Wendigo type enemies, and there is a very good reason that we want to pick this up. So the metal itself is going to increase crit damage, which is almost entirely useless because we don't crit very often with this build, but it's buffing physical pierce and internal trauma damage, which are all welcome stats. You're getting buffs to physique and spirit is actually a stat that, or an attribute that is pretty underutilized for this build, but does help when it comes to putting on some of this gear. You're also getting energy regen, which is incredibly helpful because I did find out during the Ultimate experience that the energy consumption for this build can go pretty nuts if you're not managing it well. So what I mean is that you fire off a lot of abilities on very short cooldowns and you can burn through that little green bar pretty quick. After that though, we are getting Pierce and Chaos Resistance along with the best parts of this metal, which are another +3 to Shattering Smash with a 2-meter range increase to Shattering Smash and adding some more flat physical damage to Shattering Smash. We are smashing so much. When it comes to all this gear, combining to give all of these points to an ability that just gets spread back out into the build, it is truly chef's kiss, but it's all about making the best use of Shattering Smash, and that all really requires you to be able to take a lot of hits. That being said, since Wendigo Glare is a monster infrequent, it will drop very easily from the Wendigo type monsters that you will find in Act 5, so as soon as you get there, start hunting that bad boy down, equip it as early as you can, and then pick up those upgrades throughout Normal, Elite, and Ultimate for the best possible rolls that you can find. Now, if ever there were a pair of pants that would go with this build, they are the Mythical Dread Knight's leg plates. You can find the smaller version of these, which are just the plain old Dread Knight's leg plates, but the mythical version has plenty more stats for us to make use of and much higher armor. So that being said, the buffs that we're getting from the Dread Knight's leg plates are going to be physical, internal trauma, and then vitality and vitality decay. Those stats are going to be basically wasted, but since we've got our physical and internal trauma damage, it's not really anything to lose any sleep over. We're also getting an enormous amount of flat health from these pants, anywhere from 992 to almost 1500. They're giving us movement speed too, as well as some dodge chance, which never hurt anybody, and you're getting the ever-coveted physical resistance, anywhere from 3 to 5% to get us up to that short little cap for the most sought-after defensive stat in Ultimate difficulty. After that, though, you're getting Pierce and Chaos resistance, just like some of the other items in this build so far, and I don't have to mention to you why that Chaos resistance, again, is so important. After that, though, we have 4 abilities that are getting points added into them, but only one of them is actually going to be used in this build, and that is none other than, you guessed it, the Shattering Smash. This is another +3 into that ability, which is absolutely awesome. Getting +3 instead of +1 or +2 is disgusting. And at this point, all the gear that we have that is buffing Shattering Smash is going the +3 route. So having that get closer to 20 faster is never a bad thing, meaning that these pants are pulling their weight. After that, they have their own granted skill, which activates on a 20% chance for your blocks. And when it does activate, it's got a very large range to do vitality damage and convert 100% of that damage into health. So basically, you have a 20% chance when you block to do some pretty decent life leech in a very, very big AoE. Also, do yourself a favor while you are going through finding all of this gear and pick up as many anti-venom salves or other components as you can to increase your maximum resistances. Once you have those resistances up to 80, you're going to have a much better time in Ultimate, because absolutely everything in this difficulty deals mountains of damage, and having those resistances stand in the way of you and all of that death potential is a very, very good thing. So as far as components go, remember to get your anti-venom salves. You're going to want an Aether Soul and some soul shards as well for the vitality resistance, but those are going to be mainly your easy ones to pick up. There are a number of other components that you need for this build, which we'll talk about towards the end, but they require a little bit more farming and a good deal more of patience. So, that being said, with our pants out of the way, I want to talk about our chest and our helmet, and then we're going to wrap this bad boy up. Now, Gildor's Guard is your level 94, not mythical, but big endgame chest piece. Gildor's Guard has 1900 armor on it, which is fantastic for what we're about, and it's going to buff your physical, pierce, and internal trauma damage to everyone's happiness. You're also getting another very big chunk of flat health added to your base, and then the Gildor's Guard is going to turn right around and increase that base by anywhere from 5 to 7%. Your health pool should be very close to about 20,000 once you have a lot of this gear farmed up. Now after that health goes in, you're getting physical resistance yet again, because this chest piece is chef's kiss, and it's going to turn around and give you elemental and bleeding resistance right after that. Couple that with the fact that it's buffing your retaliation damage, all of your retaliation damage yet again, and you can see how this chest piece ticks all of the boxes. The only real downside to this chest piece is that the points in the abilities that it provides are mostly wasted, just like our pants. So unfortunately, we're not even getting a +3 to Shattering Smash with this chest piece, but we are getting +3 to Haven. Haven is that Celestial Presence upgrade that we're using to increase our health by another big percentage. So the more points that we have into Haven, the more percent health that we're getting to survive even more attacks. It's pretty crazy how good Haven is coupled with Heart of the Wild over on Mogdrogan's Pact. So having +3 in that ability is very, very good. Now, the final thing about Gildor's Guard that is very impressive is its ability to activate on a 33% chance of blocks. Given that this build has a lot of block chance and a pretty short cooldown on our shields, it's going to be activating pretty often. So, as it stands, my build specifically has a 68% chance to block with a 45% reduction in block recovery. That means that the shield that we're using, which is the Grey Knight, has a 1 second block recovery, which is basically reduced to 0.55 seconds, meaning that we have a chance to block every half second. Now, block chance and block recovery are pretty math heavy if you really have to sit there and talk about it like I do, so I'm not going to do that, but go over to the Grim tools, put it down on paper yourself if you really want to see what it all amounts to. Regardless, the stats are high enough to make them very effective with the rest of the block chance, the block recovery, and the block amount that we have going on in this build. That being said, 33% chance on block to activate Gildor's Guard, which is on a 10-second cooldown with a 6-second duration, buffing your physical pierce and internal trauma by another 100%, increasing the amount of blocked damage that your shield can take by 35%, giving you a huge chunk of physical damage retaliation, and turning around and buffing all of your retaliation damage by another 100%. For the chest piece, I did equip it with the Chains of Oleron for an increase to more offensive ability and a movement speed buff, but if you have something else that would work better on your chest slot, don't forget to equip that component instead. I went with the offensive ability because I felt like I needed more of it, but that may not be the same case for you while you're playing through the build. Now, after the chest piece is done, we've got our helmet, which is Targo's helm, and this can be crafted off of a blueprint, and it is going to add a whole bunch of good stuff, stats-wise and ability-wise, to Judgment. Judgment is our massive AoE vacuum. You see me activate it every couple of seconds in this build, and it is incredibly useful, incredibly potent for what it does for our build. But Targo's helm specifically is going to give you internal trauma damage just added to your base over 5 seconds. You're going to get buffs to physical pierce and internal trauma damage. Don't have to tell you how good those are still. You're getting elemental damage actually converted into physical damage as well. So all of anything else that we pick up either through devotions, gear, or anything else laying out there on the field is going to get converted into our main damage type. We're getting elemental resistance and bleeding resistance with some very rare skill cooldown reduction. You're getting anywhere from 4 to 6% with that reduction in cooldown, so nothing to shake a stick at. Finally, you are getting +1 into all your Oathkeeper skills before we talk about the changes to Judgment. So more Oathkeeper points is always a good thing because this build does rely pretty heavily on the Oathkeeper tree. As far as Judgment's changes go, though, it's going to give us a flat buff to the physical damage that Judgment does, and it's going to add on some internal trauma damage quite a bit larger than the physical damage increase that it's doing. But more internal trauma damage means more happy for us, because internal trauma damage is much more difficult to resist than just plain old physical damage. The final item that warrants some mention for this build is going to be our shield. Now, we're using the Grey Knight, and there is a reason for that apart from its fantastic reference to Warhammer 40k. The Grey Knight has a little blurb just underneath it: the bulwark of the faceless defender of Menhir who stood alone against a gathering of heretics and emerged the victor. That is a very slight nod to the Grey Knights of 40k, who are antithesis to all things heretical and demonic in that universe, and are not known about by anybody other than the highest order of everything Imperium. So unless you are an Inquisitor or some big bad in the Imperium, you don't know who the Grey Knights are, which is that fun little nod that they're faceless, standing against heretics and still the victor because they're ridiculously superhuman. All the fanboy aside, as far as the Grey Knight goes in stats, you're getting flat buffs to your physical and internal trauma damage with increases in the duration of the internal trauma damage, and a flat amount of internal trauma damage added to the pool. So all those buffs come with some ground up damage increase as well. It's also converting fire damage to physical, giving you a very big chunk of physical resistance, anywhere from 8 to 12%, and increasing your armor again by 16 to 24%. So very, very good stats coming out of this shield. As it stands, remember that a lot of the higher tier shields in this game will have a 35% chance to block a set amount of damage. The Grey Knight has that 35% chance, and it comes with a 1 second cooldown on its ability to do the blocking, which is reduced by our block recovery stat. So anytime that you're picking up shield, if you see that it has a 35% chance to do a block, you're going to assume that that is the highest tier of shield that you can find. The chance to block that you're seeing on that stat screen does take that chance into account. So the 68% chance to block is incorporating that 35% chance listed on the shield. With that info dump out of the way, the cool part about the Grey Knight is that it is giving you another +3 to your Judgment ability, and it is reducing the cooldown of Judgment by 1.1 second, meaning that the cooldown on that ability is going to be so short that you should be just slurping dudes up from every corner of every crevice. And I know what I said, I don't need you to tell me. It's also going to increase the physical damage and internal trauma damage that Judgment does, making it more of a nuke tool on top of your ability to shatter and smash everybody with your punches of inhuman strength. Grey Knight also has its own ability, which activates on a 20% chance to block, and it is called the Grey Barrier, which is a 10,000 damage absorption shield that protects you from poison or acid, vitality, aether, and chaos. So it's not going to do anything when those big physical damage or elemental damage guys come up to punch you, but everything else is basically nullified when it comes to this shield. On top of that, the component that we're using for this shield is going to be the Serrated Shell, and the reason for that is because the Serrated Shell reduces your shield recovery time by 20%, which is part of the reason that we can get it up to that 45%. Serrated Shell is also going to add on physical damage retaliation and buff all of your retaliation damage by another 20%. The ability that comes with Serrated Shell is fine too. It does all the right damage, but I wouldn't consider it something that you have to have for this build to work. Even in this video, I ended up equipping it early on because I had completely forgotten that it was even there. I mainly want this component for the stats that it provides over the activatable ability. And on the subject of components, we're going to speed run through the rest of those bad boys because there are a couple hanging out that you will need to offset some of the resistance deficiencies of this build. You're going to want to pick up Living Armor, which is going to give you elemental resistance, which is something that is lacking, sadly, before you pick up some of the other parts of this build. So, that being said, Living Armor gives you Chaos Resistance, even though it's a little bit small at 8%. Chaos and Elemental Resistance are fantastic. Living Armor also increases your armor absorption rate by 12%, and if you hadn't guessed it by now, our armor absorption on this build is at 100%, so our armor is going to do quite a bit of damage mitigation for us. Living Armor also gives you offensive ability, which is another stat that is desperately lacking on this build, so make sure that you get at least one Living Armor. All of the stats that it has are useful no matter what stage of the game that you're in. After picking up the Living Armor, you're going to want to look for a... it's going to be a Tainted Heart. Yes, Tainted Heart goes in your amulet, and Tainted Heart gives you 15 offensive ability, along with 12% vitality and aether resistance. Vitality and aether are also two stats that are tough to come by in this build, and I had to use augments and components in order to get them up and above that 80%. So, Tainted Heart, incredibly helpful for that specific hurdle. You'll also use the Aether Soul, like I mentioned earlier, on your metal in order to get that Aether resistance up, along with some defensive ability. Don't forget the Anti-Venom Salves. And then for your Stone Guard Pummeler, you're going to want to go ahead and pick up the Seal of Might. Seal of Might is only available at level 75, but once you pick it up, you're getting buffs to physical damage, you're getting flat physical damage, buffs to internal trauma and bleeding damage, converting aether damage to physical damage, 160 flat health, And you're going to pick up the Presence of Might passive, which gives you 4% physical resistance, 12% pierce, vitality, and bleeding resistance. The bonuses to your pets don't apply because we don't have any pets, but just remember all of those resistances that you get are fantastic when coupled with all the really good passive stats that Presence of Might provides you with anyway. And then don't forget all the soul shards. You need at least 2 of them for your rings because vitality resistance is very lacking in this build, at least where I was when I'm, in this video. And then finally, for the boots, we ended up taking some bladed plating because bladed plating gives us 120 flat health with 24 offensive ability and a 30% buff to all of our retaliation damage. We could also get away with the Mogdrogan's Seal of Mogdrogan. It's the big boot upgrade. It gives you a big increase to your health bar because it provides you with a % increase to your health, and it also provides you with a pretty big chunk of movement speed. That being said, I picked the bladed plating because the 120 health plus the offensive ability mattered more to me than I think it was about 300 to 400 health with those other stats on the Seal of Mogdrogan. So go with what you feel on the boots. I just wanted to mention it because more offensive ability and flat health is never a bad thing. And I've talked far too much as it is in this video, but that is it. That is your Ultimate Archon, the Stand and Punch, Shattering, Smash, Attack Speed, Block Chance build. Go back and let me know how all 3 of these videos were, if indeed you made it this far, and we'll be back next week with something new to start from the ground up. Now that's it for me, everybody. This is Winback signing off. Peace out.